Hi everyone and welcome to this video. In this video we are going to learn how we can implement functions in Python. So first of all, we already know how to create a basic function. First of all, we will use the def keyword and then we give the function a name. In this case it's welcome. Then we have the circular parentheses and finally we use colon and indentation to denote all the statement that belongs to the code block of this function. So this is basic function and it does nothing but just makes a print statement. So it prints something to the console. So welcome to the Python course. This is what will be printed when we execute this function. Now if you want to execute a function in Python, you simply have to mention the function's name and again use the same set of circular parentheses, and that is called calling a function. So once you execute this piece of code, you will see that this print statement was executed and we get the output what we had written inside the print statement. And now because this is a function and we have already talked about the fact that functions are reusable piece of code, you can execute this function, call again and again, you will get the same output. So second time we call the function here, we will get the same output. So you have written this code once, but you can call this function any number of times. The next interesting concept of a function in Python is the return statement. Let's understand the return statement with an example. So I have this function adding two numbers, and this function basically adds two numbers, 3 and 4, and saves them in a variable called total and just prints the value of total here. And let's execute this cell. Now I have another function here where I'm doing everything almost the same we have done in the first function, but in this function there is another piece of code at the end. That is the return statement and we are actually returning the value of the variable total. Let's also execute this function. So let's see what happens. First of all, when I call this function add underscore two underscore numbers, I get sum of 3 and 4, which is 7, which is what we had written inside the print statement. Now I also want to store the value of this computation here outside the function in a variable called output1, so that maybe I can use this value further in the program. So when I store output1 equal to whatever this function has computed, I am getting the same output, which is the output from the print statement. Sum of 3 and 4 is 7. Now, if I execute output 1, let's run this one, I'll see that this variable does not hold any value. And the basic reason for that is, in this function, because we do not have a return statement, whatever calculations we are doing are only being done inside this function. And the minute you come outside the function, those values do not exist. But when you use a return statement explicitly, like in the second function that I created, what happens is when you call the second function, the value of the variable total is also being returned from the function. And that value, let's say it's stored output 2. Let's execute this one. Now check that here if you call this output 2 one more time, you will see that the total is going to be returned. So a return statement in function is very important when you actually want to store the result of a computation that a function has done. Otherwise, if you do not need to store this value and you just need to perform some computations inside the function and print a result, you can avoid the return statement. But in case you need to use this value for further calculations, always make it a point to use the return statement. And next, coming to the passing parameters part. Now, if you remember, in our area of the circle example, a function was actually expecting the radius as the parameter or as input. So in this case here, our welcome function is expecting a name as a parameter. And what it's basically doing is, it's returning a string here, as you see, which is a combination of this template, welcome to Python course, with the name. So let's see what this does. First of all, I'm giving the parameter Lisa. And let's run this. It says welcome to Python course Lisa. When I give the parameter Ali, it says welcome to Python course Ali. Essentially, this is the same outcome of functions that we had seen in the area example. You write this code just once and you are able to reuse this code again and again for different values of name. You can imagine this is like a login window of some website. So whichever the user comes in, that user gets a personalized or customized message displayed. Now, because we are talking about parameters, you can also give a default value to each of the parameters in a function. And default value, as name suggests, is essentially that value which will be taken in case the user does not pass any value while calling the function. So here is the function. Let's run this. And the default value of the variable name is David. So now when I'm passing Rohan, I'm getting this message. Welcome to Python course Rohan. But if I pass nothing in the parentheses and run this one, by default the name that will be taken is David. Now if you would have just removed the default parameter here, let's get rid of this one, and call this function without passing the value of name, let's run this, it will give you an error because as Python says, this function is expecting an argument, in this case name. So this is why it's usually a good practice to provide the default parameters in your function. The next thing that comes when you consider parameters is, most of the time, the order of parameters matters. So the order in which you have written them in the function and the order in which you are passing them to the function actually matters. So let's take this example. There is this function, met function, and it's taking two numbers, small number and large number, and it's basically returning the difference of the large number from the small number. So you're taking the large number and you are subtracting the small number from it. If you correctly pass the values of 4 and 16, you will get a straightforward difference, which is 12. It's basically saying 16 minus 4 is 12. Now, instead of passing them in the right order, as you have defined it here in the function, suppose you pass them in the opposite order. Let's run this. And in this case, you are getting a wrong output, minus 12. And situations like this can actually lead to bugs in your code. So you have to be careful about that. In Python, the position or the sequence of arguments actually matter. So whatever sequence you're given while defining the function, you have to follow the same sequence while calling the function. The next concept comes to solve this issue quite a bit is using keyword arguments in Python. So now suppose you do not want to impose this condition on your users that you know you have to pass the values in the same order because sometimes you might forget what the order you have given. There can be a lot of functions in your code or for any other reasons. In that case, instead of passing these values normally, you can pass these values like keywords. Let's see what I mean. Then we will create a new code here, met function, large number and small number. And we will create a new code here. So now we already know that our met function is defined here up. It's expecting a small number by a large number. So instead of just passing it in this way, where we say met function in the parentheses 16, 4, when we pass it this way, as you see on the screen, it's assumed that the small number is 4 and large number is 16. And that's why we will not have any error here. When we run this, we will have 16. And you can change the order of it. Doesn't matter. If you run this again, you will get the right, correct output. Even though it was expecting the small number here in the first part of the sequence, it's still not confused because you're explicitly saying that even though I'm passing this as the first value, but this actually belongs to the variable large number. Similarly for this one too, even if you keep it in this order, which was the initial order, as long as you are specifying explicitly that this value actually belongs to this variable in your function definition, it will always work. Thank you for watching this video. In the second part of this video, we will continue to learn how to code functions in Python.